Cast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Welcome to the study of Steps to the Great Perfection. Kindly generate the intention to listen to this as part of the practice of generating the wisdom that sees through the delusion of samsara, and intending to cultivate this wisdom so that we may establish all living beings on the level of perfect enlightenment. So, presently we're looking at the realms of samsara, and this is part of knowing the nature of mind. The great perfection is the great medicine that cures the illness of confusion and directly introduces the natural abiding purity of the mind. And yet in the study of this medicine, we also want to know the illnesses and their causes. And particularly with an awareness of the illnesses, then we're more motivated to pursue, you could say, our own recovery, and also caring for those that are stuck in the conditions of suffering. So we've looked at some of the conditions that the mind can get itself into in terms of strong, painful, and limited spaces, the lower realms. And I remember once Sonsekens Rinpoche defining the lower realms is the place where we don't really understand how our actions are what create our experience. Whereas in the higher realms, there is an awareness that actions, body, speech, and mind, they are what create our experience, and hence also within the higher realms there's a greater sense of the impact that avoiding negative actions and embracing positive actions that they have. So this is one way of defining the difference between the higher and the lower realms. But it's also important when we're now looking at the higher realms that we understand these are not really the solution. They're just a temporary solution. We haven't actually, in the higher realms, we haven't addressed the real issue. So it's a bit like if we're doing a course of antibiotics, and we begin to feel better, then we just say, "Oh, well, that's fine. I'm good," without having completed the course. And similarly, also the many other contexts where things just might be okay, and then we think that's good enough. But in fact, the higher realms are really just places where, unless we get to the bottom of what causes suffering, then the higher realms are just temporary conditions of some limited pleasure. So dissatisfaction in the higher realms. At this point, you may think that rebirth in the three lower realms fit these descriptions, but that the attainment of the higher realm offers no such suffering and grants only happiness. This, however, is not the case. Letter to a Friend explains, even the great happiness experienced in the higher realms is outweighed by the suffering of death and transmigration. And when transmigrating from the heavens, those who have no virtue left are powerless. They end up in the animal, spirit, or helm realms, whatever case they may be. While the application of mindfulness sutra teaches, humans are impaired by a short lifespan. Gods are impaired by their own carelessness. Demigods are impaired by quarreling and strife. There is no happiness to be had in samsara, not even so much as a needle tip's worth. Of course, within our limited experience, we might feel there are times when this is actually quite okay, this is wonderful, and so forth. But that's only very much from the very dualistic position of the fussy, the fussy, very demanding, self-centered, self being gratified. And so it's plenty pregnant with all sorts of, the potential for suffering. But also when we speak about how the higher realms end up as the lower realms, that is just because that in the higher realms there is the temporary conditions for happiness, but they're just temporary. They're just conditions. There's no real liberation. And once the karma is exhausted, then they can go anywhere. But we might as well be clear that they could easily go into the lower realms. And we also say the God realms, because of their clairvoyance, they're able to see where they're going to be reborn, which makes their suffering even greater. So Jigme Lingpa, he says, even if you manage to attain a pleasurable human existence in the higher realms, overt experiences of suffering will soon pile up, like what you might experience if your mother were to pass away right after your father, with the suffering of change. So this is what we call suffering of suffering. So that is the first kind, that we have one suffering that's then followed by another suffering. With the suffering of change, what seems pleasant one moment can suddenly change to suffering, like being killed instantly by eating poisoned food or drowning while swimming across a river for fun. So that's the second kind of suffering, which is really just that wherever we are, situations can change. And the last category then of suffering is the pervasive suffering of conditioning, is the result of conditioning factors such as experiencing a serious illness due to improper diet, clothing, or behavior, or the retribution one might experience after attacking a powerful individual. So suffering comes in all sorts of ways, and basic to all of them is this dualistic, pervasive conditioning that is the foundation for any kind of suffering. So Jigme Lingpa says these are the three root sufferings. The Vinaya scriptures state, samsara is a heap of suffering, the suffering, of conditioning, and of change. These three, and the 8, bring intense suffering to humans. In addition to the 3 root sufferings, humans also suffer terribly from being afflicted by the 8 subsidiary sufferings, the 4 sufferings of birth, old age, sickness, and death, as well as meeting with hated enemies, being separated from loved ones, being bereft of the objects of one's desires, and the continual perception of suffering due to the 5 perpetuating aggregates. For this reason, the great omniscient one writes, Longchenpa writes, hence, all of human existence is devoid of happiness due to the causes and results of suffering. To liberate yourself from this, contemplate the excellent Dharma and employ methods for bringing liberation from samsara's realm. Similarly, there is incalculable suffering in the heavens of the desire realms. And now we're going to go through various kinds of sufferings in the higher realms. Again, kindly remember, as you're sort of being exposed to these different kinds of suffering, that the point here is that just like if we're a student of medicine, we're going to be going through all the wards of the hospital. We're going to be going to the emergency wards. We're going to see people who have their limbs torn off. We're going to see big open wounds. We're going to see plenty of suffering. And all of the time, as a student of medicine, we're doing this thinking, ideally, I am pursuing this as a way to enable to address all these sufferings. So this is the bodhicitta, the bodhisattva motivation we'd want to have as we're suffering this. And this, of course, also applies in making wise choices with regards to our own lifestyle. So we might understand how suffering comes about, and then also we apply it to ourselves. So, although the heaven of the four great kings, the heaven of the 33, the heaven of Gemini, the joyous heaven, the heaven of enjoyable manifestations, and the heaven of mastery of others' creations, do appear to be pleasurable states, in fact, the beings there experience nothing but the grievous suffering of change and conditioning. And so also with regards to the descriptions of these realms, which are not part of our cosmology, this is not something we learned about in either physics or geography and so on. These are experienced by individuals who have less obscurations. So naturally, the great sages and us, we would share conventional perceptions, but also sages would have access to seeing things that we don't see. And so the cosmology that we have within Buddhist cultures, and generally cultures where you have a tradition of purifying the consciousness and purifying conception, there you find descriptions of beings that are not ordinarily known within our culture. How they classify them and the ways and so forth might seem as if they're cultural constructs, but regardless, then we should be aware that there are that we could well trust sages and individuals who have less obscuration to know about dimensions that are unknown to us. So we should listen carefully to this. I remember actually once one of my teachers, Tukupa, he said when he was young he used to see things and he was very happy to his father because his father could explain what they were. And so within the, you could say, community, families of beings with less obscurations, then there is continually seeing things that we might not see. But then again, these are not just mysterious hallucinations, they are things that can be understood. So, with regards to these beings in these realms, it says, when they die, their skin turns an ugly hue, their flower garlands wither, they go depressed, their divine spouses leave them, and their thoughts become disturbed. When they perceive their future birthplaces with their divine eyes, meaning with their clairvoyance, what they see causes them to panic and faint. Their divine mothers and fathers, friends, loved ones, and so forth cry out from afar, may you be reborn as a human in Jambudvipa, meaning may you take a human rebirth in this world that we presently inhabit. May you practice the 10 virtues and be born here in the heavens once again. With these wishes and aspirations, they scatter flowers and run far away. They undergo these sufferings for 7 of the God realm days. So these beings are basically ostracized. Gods who have for countless eons endured great pleasure. At this point then they're seen. It's clear to them that they're going to die. They're seen by their peers that they're going to die. They also begin to emit putrid odors, and as such they're ostracized from the community of gods. And this is then the scenario that we have here where they say, their family and relatives, they wish you the best, and then they leave you. So then, before the transfer to then the lower realms begins, they are left there for 7 days. Jigme Lingpa says, "How wretched! When we humans die, our friends and family gather around our beds and do whatever they can to please us. Yet we still suffer horribly and fall into great despair. So it should go without saying how much the gods suffer from death and transmigration from this situation that's described here. Furthermore, the magnificent form realm gods of meditative absorption also die. This includes those in the heaven of the class of Brahma up to those in the heaven of great result. When these gods pass away, the pleasure they experience in the present transforms, and they experience the incalculable suffering of entering into the next state of existence. Noble Nagarjuna explains, even those in the abode of Brahma and all the other spontaneously accomplished absorptions, who seem so majestically radiant and beautiful, fail to apprehend the dormant concept of self. So is there any way to be sure that they won't be reborn in hell once they die? So as much as there are these abodes of meditation, the seed, the fixating on a self, while it might not be perceived as such, is still there. There's still the seed of cognitive obscuration and so forth. So similarly, the four formless realms are not proximate causes of omniscience, meaning staying in these realms, these styles of jhana, or jhanas, are not causes for eliminating cognitive obscuration. So they might be realms in which there's tremendous peace, lack of afflictions, and so forth, but there's still the seed of dualism is still there. Rather, these formless realms of meditation are neutral states of absorption that are ephemeral and diffuse planes of existence. Just as a bird flying in the sky must eventually land on solid ground, at some point these beings will have to die, transmigrate, and experience the indeterminate suffering of their next existence. And also using that same example with the bird up in the sky. So while we would say in these realms of meditative absorption, the presence of this fixation on a self, just like a bird high above the ground, the shadow is not visible. But as soon as then they come close to dying, and when the circumstances manifest, then just like a bird then comes close to the ground, then the shadow becomes very visible. So Jigme Lingpa continues, what a mistake it is to place one's trust in such ephemeral forms of happiness. Letter to a student states, in this world, terrorized as it is by a flaming mass of suffering, those who arrogantly take suffering to be happiness invite the jaws of the Lord of Death to open once again, for this is the seed of the tree of their future birth. Furthermore, the suffering of demigods is even more intense. Letter to a friend states, the natural animosity that demigods feel towards the glory of the gods certainly pains their minds. Though they may be intelligent, the obscurations of these beings prevent them from seeing the truth. When demigods see the happiness and wealth of the gods in the realms in the heaven of the 33, they burn with the fire of hatred and jealousy. This drives them to wage war with the gods. The suffering they undergo on the battlefield is agonizing. Their heads and limbs are severed by vajras, arrows, discs, and other weapons. Their life force ceases, their bodies are severely injured, and they end up meeting their own death. For even if they happen to be intelligent, they will not attain the path of seeing of the listeners due to the influence of obscurations. Consequently, it is said that they do not see the truth. So also if we read Chögyam Trungpa's descriptions of the demigod realm, the Asuras, it's one of being very intelligent, but it's one of paranoia. So the very intelligent Asura is continually suspecting that he or she is being had, that he or she is being subject to trickery, deception, and continually looking at this very highly politicized situation where there's the sense that the other is the adversary. So living with that affliction of animosity and jealousy, then they wage these wars. Citing the Heap of Jewels Sutra, however, the Great Omniscient One wrote that this is not the case according to the Great Vehicle. Regardless, it is necessary to exert yourself in the means for avoiding such states of existence. On this point, the Omniscient One writes, as the demigods suffer terribly, then those beings with peaceful, virtuous karma must swiftly set out to practice the sacred Dharma. Thus the suffering of samsara is boundless and severely oppressive. No sooner are you freed from one painful experience that you get caught up in another, like a bucket spinning around on a water wheel or a bee caught in a jar. So just like you have a watermill in Europe and America that's continually turning around. In India, you have these systems which are like watermills, but they pick up the water and bring them up to. It's when you have all the rice fields, right, the paddies. Then you have water running, and then you have these systems where you bring the water up into the paddies through these water wheels systems. By its very nature. So like that, and then also like a bee caught in a jar, which is again, the bee might be up in the higher part of the jar, which is like the higher realms, but it's still caught. By its very nature, samsara is nothing but suffering, as the letter to a student states. The one who, revolving through the perpetual cycle of samsara, views a moment's respite as happiness, is sure to wander in the forms of all kinds of beings, powerlessly, over hundreds of lifetimes. You may think, well, I'm not too worried. The Buddha will protect me from the lower realms and all the sufferings commonly experienced by the 6 classes of beings. But this is not the case. The Vinaya quotes the Buddha as saying, I have shown you the path to liberation, but liberation depends on you. So be diligent. So as long as we have the cause of samsara, which is the various obscurations, the basic confusion, the mistaking brilliant, luminous, cognitive mind to be a self, and the space and the field of this luminous mind to be other, then with that duality, then there are all the afflictions that come from self-centering, from likes and dislikes, and all the afflictions that come out of that, all the afflicted dualistic emotions. And on the basis of these, then there are all the actions that are driven by these afflicted conditions. And they become basic to us. They become the pattern that drives us. So whether we're in the higher or lower realm, as long as we still have that seed, which is this ignorance, this basic confusion, then it doesn't really matter if we're high or low. The cause is still there, and so when we might experience some respite, and we might think, "Hey, this is not too bad. I'm I'm having a good time," and let's just hope the Buddha will look after me, or the good Lord, or some sort of benevolent force. That there's some sort of deterministic drive in the universe that where we are particularly favored. We shouldn't really count on that. So it all really depends on our actions, what we're doing, and of course also this applies then in terms of the practice of the path. It's on the basis of our actions that we gain higher rebirth, and it's also on the basis of our actions that we can liberate ourselves from confusion altogether. So since we're confused about what we should and shouldn't do, the blissful one uses various means to show us the path to liberation. So basic to all sentient beings is they want to be happy, but they very often engage in actions that might serve them on a short time basis, might provide temporary happiness, but very often some of these actions intended to provide relief or happiness really just become the causes of suffering. However, Jigme Lingpa continues, just as no one has the power to stop us from dreaming when we are in a deep slumber, Actual liberation from samsara and the lower realms depends slowly on our own diligence. We can be sure that if this were not the case, one of the compassionate Buddhas would have emptied existence long, long ago with his or her light rays of compassion. So if it was the ability for the Buddhas to help us, then in that their compassion and abilities in no way are limited, that they have infinite capacity, then of course they would have emptied all of samsara. However, as far as our confusion goes, this is something that we need to resolve ourselves, as per the quote again above from the Vinaya Sutra. Liberation depends on you, so be diligent. We have fallen into the pit of samsara, Jigme Lingpa continues, and are bound tight by the shackles of dualistic perception, stabbed by the blades of the afflictions, the kleshas. We are enduring the suffering of the present, and we have no choice but to be led to more suffering in the future. Think this over well and cultivate infinite compassion for all the 6 classes of sentient beings, to lead them all to the path of liberation from this day forward in whatever ways you can. Make offerings to the 3 jewels, the source of all sublime qualities. If you harbor a non-virtuous thought for even an instant, use a strong antidote to subdue it, and then confess and vow to avoid such negativity in the future. So nobody knows what's happening in our mind, but we do. And what's happening in our mind is something that is real. It's verifiable. We know it, and it has an impact. So it's part of a continual conditioning of our confusion that the non-virtuous thoughts and conceptions, they have results, they impact, they leave traces, and so forth. And so we should part from that. And again, the term that we very often have trouble with due to our cultural baggage, confession, is actually an incredibly sane thing to do. It doesn't implicitly refer to anything other than actually just parting ways with neurotic action. And the Tibetan actually, this is virtue of the Padmakara translation group, is really this, the Tibetan shakpa, meaning just to leave aside. That's we very often we translate it as confessing, in the sense of that we're exposing it, but it also implies that we're going to leave it aside. So we can choose to leave aside neurotic, destructive patterns, and so that's why we're determined to avoid these actions in the future. Again, the Vinaya scriptures explain: do not take small negative acts lightly, believing they can do no harm. For even a tiny spark can burn a mountain of grass. You should amass virtuous thoughts, even those that seem insignificant, and pass your time doing only what is wholesome and virtuous. Some claim that they are unable to study and contemplate because they have limited intelligence. Others claim they cannot make offerings or gifts of material wealth because they're not rich enough. Still others claim that they're simply too old for Dharma practice to be effective. Although people make all kinds of excuses, it is mainly their own mind that is holding them back. The teachings say that even an animal can attain liberation if it can arouse diligence and confidence. So why even mention that this is true for humans? As Shantideva once wrote, "Do not let yourself be discouraged, thinking, how could enlightenment be for me?" The thus gone rightly said, and thus these true words were spoken. Even flies, mosquitoes, bees, and worms could reach unsurpassed enlightenment. Difficult to attain though it may be, were they to muster the strength of intelligence. What then of human beings like me? I recognize what is beneficial and what harms. So if I don't reject enlightened conduct, why should I not be able to attain enlightenment? And the ornament of the sutras states, Since limitless human beings attain perfect enlightenment in each and every moment, do not be discouraged. So we can look at the sages of the past, and we can also hear stories from the present day about people who attain perfect enlightenment, display signs of accomplishment, and even we can see people who change over time through the practice of the path, and we can assert for ourselves that probably the moments that we have some grip on our neurotic mind, this actually is obviously the remedy for our suffering. So we can see within our own experience. On the other hand, no matter how much virtuous karma you have, avoid becoming satisfied with yourself or trying to calculate how much you have. As the Flower Ornament Sutra says, noble child, do not become attached to one virtuous deed. Do not be satisfied with perfecting one approach to Dharma or one activity. Why, you may ask? Because, noble child, the Bodhisattva must amass an infinite number of virtuous deeds. However much we strive toward virtue, a close investigation will reveal that our virtue is mixed with negativity and non-virtue. But while an occasional pure act of virtue may be possible, the vast majority of sentient beings have impure perception, so it is exceedingly rare to accumulate virtuous deeds that are embraced by the threefold excellence: the excellent preparation, main practice, and conclusion. So with these threefold excellences, this is to prepare with bodhicitta. So when we do something, we check our motivation and see what are my grounds for this particular action. The main point is really to see that it's not tinged or tainted by self-centered agendas in terms of greed, in terms of aggression, or just in terms of plain dullness. So to see that our mind does not have that, and then in addition to also have the genuinely caring for others with no self-interest, that's the excellent preparation. Main practice is then to do it without reference point, without self-consciousness, without the sort of the notion of I am doing something, but just following through. And conclusion is also where we do it ideally without reference to ourself, without self-congratulations. And that's where we talk about the conclusion is then dedicating, where we consider that anything good, we don't hold on to it, but we give it away, and we give it away without any sense of self, other, and action, which is, of course, not easy, but then just thinking, may this benefit others. Therefore, Jigme Lingpa continues, when it comes to the virtue linked with merit that runs out after a single ripening, you may boast of having as much as the supreme central mountain, meaning Mount Meru, meaning that much virtue, but this virtue is as insubstantial as an autumn cloud. So even if you're considering stretching out your arm, always make sure that it becomes a pure act of virtue. So it means that actually anything that we do could actually become an act of virtue. When we're walking, we can make the aspiration in walking in this direction. May I imagine that I am leading all sentient beings to enlightenment. So even we're just doing a small action, stretching out an arm, may we think this as a gesture of generosity, and we think may all beings perfect the accumulation of the merit of generosity and so on. So in this way, we can both on the non-conceptual level, being free from dualistic conception, and also on a conceptual level, train our mind in continually integrating this aspiration to create the causes for higher realms and liberation. So, good morning, La. Good morning. I'm wondering how to contemplate the four thoughts in the context of Ngondro if I'm doing a 2-hour block. Do I just sit and think about, say, impermanence the whole time? Should I be reading passages from Words of My Perfect Teacher and reflect on them, or just think about them in my own terms? It can be boring to contemplate the same thing for so long. Indeed. Thank you for this question, because it's a very important point. If we were brought up in the Tibetan tradition, we might well have memorized a lot of scriptures that we could then basically mull over and think about. And so sometimes in the classical presentation, there is the notion just sit and contemplate, but indeed that's very difficult for us. Unless you are vastly different from myself, I am like you. I mean, I also would get, well, not just bored, but just dull. And so it's very important that when it comes to these reflections, to have, I think it's very valuable to have some scripture like Words of My Perfect Teacher in front. And then just not reading it like we would normally do in terms of study, but there just have it open in front of us, and then just sit, read something, and then sit and contemplate it. And then when we've somehow exhausted our attention span, then return and then read another passage. And then also invoke the presence of the teacher every once in a while and stay fresh. If need be, then have something with you to drink, or tea and so forth. Um, and overall, just make sure that it's continually fresh and vivid. So having a text in front, like the Words of My Perfect Teacher, jewel ornament, resting, finding rest in the nature of the mind, and so forth, very helpful. Also, this text that we're studying here would qualify. How exactly do we make sure that we aren't reborn as a demigod or God? Well, the thing is, unless we are well, omniscient or profoundly visionary, clairvoyant, and so on, we actually don't. So there is no guarantee as far as our dualistic condition goes. As long as we still have cognitive obscuration, anything could happen. That's also why we don't know where we will go after we die. Of course, the more that we purify our mind, make aspirations for pure rebirth, develop bodhisattva prayers, and so on, the more we're free, and the more we have the control over where we're born. But we might have all sorts of karma. So the bottom line here really is that we don't know where we will go, and for that reason also we make every effort to create the right conditions for better rebirth. But again, we do say making aspirations for rebirth in pure realms, or taking rebirth to where we will meet with the Dharma and so on, is really a very powerful remedy. In addition, obviously, to liberate ourselves entirely. Sometimes I'm confused by statements such as, great sages are able to see such and such, whereas we ordinary folk cannot see this. And yet, it doesn't take much effort and attention to see what is being described is nothing but our very own experience. And what is more, it is a universal experience common to all. Sometimes I find these sorts of statements resemble an attempt to add humility that doesn't really resonate in being particularly honest. Well, personally, I can't see the lower realms, the higher realms, and pretty much any realm. I have friends that are psychic, that see things, and I don't think they tell me these just to draw interest to their person, but it's really just that they have less obscurations. I remember spending time with lamas who had visions, and also who talked about people who had less obscurations. So this is just a natural condition of the nadis and the prana and so forth. You have then within these categories, you have those that have karmic, more what we call karmic phenomena, which is still within the dualistic and the confused condition, but basically what we call clairvoyance. And then there are those that have actually pure wisdom manifestation, and this is then sublime sages that not just see things that are not within the scope of ordinary perception, but also really see things in terms of how they actually are. So this is, for example, what's basic to the idea of pure perception. So we would say that pure perception and the scope of wisdom, this is then established through the conventional perception of sublime beings. So really, just to understand, this is not about being particularly honest. How do you say humble and so on? It's really just about, in some way, we could say a very straightforward science. Really, is there a difference between confession and renunciation? Yeah, well, renunciation is the basic determination to no longer be fascinated and caught by confusion. And confession is more when we decide to leave aside the patterns of confusion. So but it does come with I can see where you actually draw where it seems alike. But confession is really more just a practice on the path. So it has a lot to do with when you set yourself a goal, as the path naturally does. There's an ambition. There's a lifestyle we would like to practice, and on the basis of renunciation. Then on the path, due to habitual patterns and confusion, we fall back. And that's where confession actually provides the situation of clearing that away so we're not stuck with it. And for modern people, it's a big problem when we sort of say, oh, you shouldn't feel guilty, because we do feel guilty. That's a fact. It's sort of the phenomenology of the outcome of neurotic action, right? But then when we say you shouldn't feel guilt, well, then we feel guilty about feeling guilt. So confession and what we could say parting ways with neurotic action is a proactive practice, and there are actually liturgies and so on and practices that then intend to make sure that we don't drag this along. And that's where we talk about the four powers. Actually, on the Monday webinar that I'm going to be doing just from the place here on the Monday afternoon, I'm going to be going through a sutra that speaks about these four powers. So renunciation is the foundation really of the path, and confession is one of the many skillful means on the path. All acts done with virtuous preparation, main practice and conclusion. Wow, never thought of it that way. Okay. Well, we say, we talk about the preparation with bodhicitta, main practice without reference point, and conclusion with dedication. Yeah. In many ways, I sometimes think I did not perfectly accomplish each steps on the Longchen Ngondro practice, and wondering if I should return back to do it from the beginning again, or just on the part I thought to do again, or just keep moving on. That's all right. We will realize that we have done so much practice imperfectly. We just keep moving on. But there's also very much a culture of recognizing that Ngondro is something we're continually doing. It's not like we did it at one point and then we finished it. All of these contemplations, they're something that continually are part of our outlook. I hear that practitioners I heard that practitioners at His Holiness Jigme Punsok's place will practice 4 thoughts full time for a whole year. Oh yes, where Ngondro has only 100 hours. How to ensure that I don't skim over. How to know that I have done a thorough contemplation on them. Look, we do what we can. And yes, you can do that for a long time, and you can do it for shorter time. It has also a lot to do with the quality of it. We have this anecdote from the life of Paltrim Rinpoche, when his teacher Jigme Lingpa, he would say all composite things are impermanent. And just hearing that, both teacher, Jigme Lingpa, and the student, Longchen Rabjam, would burst into tears. And that's all. And they would just sit there. So that's where we could say that's also an approach. And so that has to do with the quality. But of course, so true. So, when we do all the practice that we do, we might see that we've done it imperfectly. We might see that we could do them better. But at the same time also, I think we would also keep going. I think if we started the Ngondro, let's just follow the Ngondro format, complete it, and if we want, we can do it again. One of Dilgo Rinpoche's close students, Singdak Rinpoche, he did 19 Ngondros. and he was a great practitioner of the Chetsun Yingtik, by the way, but he did 19 Ngondros, and so there are many people who've done many Ngondros. But at the same time, don't be discouraged. We are naturally continually upping our ante, getting better at things, and so it doesn't mean that we should start doing things over. Please repeat the threefold excellence for virtuous deeds. Okay, that's whenever we do practice, or also whenever we engage in any action, really, that we have these threefold excellences in terms of our motivation, the preparation, which should ideally be bodhicitta. We should make sure that we're not caught up in the three poisons, and that we have bodhicitta. That's the motivation, preparing with the bodhicitta. The main practice, when we do something, meditation or whatever, then we do it without reference point, without continually checking back. How are we doing? Just doing it. And then we conclude practice or actions with giving away whatever merit there might be. I think you might have come across this before, but I'm glad several people are asking, because this is a very important point. Okay. And these are things that I remember Longchen Rinpoche, he would also, by the way, speak about these mind trainings, like what we're talking about here, these 4 contemplations or checking one's motivation, would start a teaching with talking about that for a long time. I remember a few years ago, sometimes it would be half of a lesson. Maybe he was going to teach some tantric sadhana, and he would spend maybe half the time just speaking about impermanence, speaking about precious human rebirth, speaking about generating pure motivation, and so on. I remember a few years ago then, Tugupen Wangyal teaching in Bellingen. I think we sat down at he came a bit late, so I think he was supposed to come around 9, and he came around 10 or 10:30. But then we sat until 4 o'clock, and mainly just one session, and really just talked about pure motivation with our actions, as far as I remember. So now we come to the 4th mind training here in this context, where the child scripture, it states, "Think to yourself, I must receive the essential instructions of my guru at all costs. I must do whatever it takes to receive them." There is not even a needle's tip worth of happiness to be had in the 6 realms. There is nothing but suffering. But once you've understood this, just getting depressed about it won't free you from suffering. You need to devote yourself solely to the method that will help the situation. And what are these methods? The Sutra of of advice to King Prasenajit explains, "At that time, great king, you will have no refuge or protection aside from the sacred Dharma. At that time, the sacred Dharma will be your refuge and protection, your support, sanctuary, and defender." This is not a matter of reading books. Just as butter comes from milk and smoke from fire, You will be able to grasp the essence only by serving the teacher, the root of the path. So we have a living tradition where we don't have just a long tradition of, you could say, scripture, the Holy Scriptures, and behavior. This is how you are supposed to do. We have a tradition of insight, which means that there are persons that have actually experienced liberation. And from these persons, we gain much more than just the words, but we gain the actual experience. And particularly then when the student is open and has that humble interest that is willing to listen, not just say, oh, I've heard what you said, but this, I'd like to share my thoughts on this. Or I don't agree with this. It's about really listening, and not only listening to the words, but trying to look beyond the words and understand the spirit of that which is completely intangible, that has nothing to do with information or data, but a quality of a human being, a magnanimity, a courage, compassion, the strength and the wisdom. And these are not seen as different items that are learnt separately, but they all come from a removal of confusion. But that quality is not something that can be learned as information or imitated as behavior. So that's why we say the teacher is the root of the path, or we also say the root of blessings, that which is intangible, but which is so palpable in terms of our experience. So always serve gurus who are learned, because the qualities of learnedness come from such gurus. Just as patients rely upon their doctors to be cured, do not be careless when it comes to serving a guru. Concerning the qualifications a guru should have, the Heap of Jewels Sutra states, how should one serve a teacher? Maitreya asked. Think of each and every teaching that your teacher gives, the Buddha replied, as nothing other than the ultimate truth, the sphere of reality itself. These teachings and clarifications are the teacher's way of leading you straight along the path. So, of course, we should make sure that the teacher is not some fly-by-night guru that had a great insight, wrote a book, became famous, and now we trust this person who has no lineage. It's just something that happened to this person, a great idea, and so forth. We should really make sure that the teacher has all the qualifications, including having studied the teaching, mastered the teaching, gone through the stages of the path, and also is someone who holds the lineage that goes back to the Buddha, the Enlightened One. On the basis of this passage, the ornament of the sutras teaches that a guru's mind should be thoroughly tamed by the three higher trainings, which is discipline, meditation, and wisdom, and that a guru should have studied widely and without partiality, and thus possess the quality of scriptural transmission. So the guru should be someone who's familiar with all the various teachings from the Buddha, not just the instructions that his or her teacher might have given, or the teachings of their particular lineage and so forth, but really an appreciation for the entire body of all the Buddha's words, also all the commentaries and so forth, and having studied widely and without partiality. The guru should have the quality of special superiority, in the sense that his or her training in the sublime knowledge of realizing the basic nature makes the guru superior to the students. So that's where a guru, not just a teacher and so forth, but someone who is a guru is somebody who has realization and who carries this weight, this capacity, this magnanimity, this greatness. Guru means heavy. It means somebody who has tremendous authority, heavy with qualities also, but it translates into this siji, or this authenticness that comes from genuine realization. So that's more than just having assimilated a lot of data. A guru needs to be aware of the underlying intent of the scriptures and be able to use the sublime strength of his or her discernment to present them in ways that disciples find pleasing, thereby leading them to the ultimate path. A guru should be unconcerned with wealth and honor and be loving and compassionate towards those who are less fortunate. Finally, a guru should not get tired of having to explain things repeatedly and have the strength of character to tolerate ingratitude. According to the general sutra that embodies all intents, gurus can also be divided into the following categories. Gurus fall into one of the following categories: the outer guru, who is skilled in cutting through misconceptions; the kind inner guru, who teaches the instructions of the secret mantra; the secret root guru, who points out the non-arising nature of mind and shows the mind's essence to be birthless; the natural guru of the ground, the guru of your own mind's purity; the guru of symbolic appearances; and lineage gurus. So we have the outer guru, who might be someone who then is able to explain the teachings and so forth, clarify them. Then we have the inner guru, then someone who gives the actual instructions of the secret mantra. This would be then a great accomplished master of mantra. And the secret root guru, who points out the non-arising nature of mind. And that's then the guru who shows us the nature of reality in our own mind. And then we talk about those that abide within ourselves, within our own realization or all understanding, recognition, the natural guru of the ground, and the guru of your own mind's purity. So these are innate to ourselves. And also the guru of symbolic appearances is then the way that we appreciate everything that arises in our experience as being a display of the teacher. So this is then the way that we integrate the practice of Guru Yoga, and is a skillful means then of integrating the non-duality of mind and phenomena. And then lineage gurus, also understanding how the lineage gurus, the masters of the past, our teachers, and their teachers, and all the way back to the primordial Buddha, all of these are also that they are present within our lives. We can understand them as external, we can also understand them as internal. As an aside, the qualifications of the student are discussed in the Tantra of the Clear Expanse. Students who are unworthy vessels are unintelligent, flattering, and insincere. These tight-fisted, sweet-talking hypocrites are thankless and break the Guru's command. They don't see good qualities and instead examine faults. Both their ancestry and mind stream are base, and they belittle the kindness of others only to praise themselves. They are lax when it comes to vows, samaya, and practice. Failure to examine the student is the enemy of the master. So also in Words of My Perfect Teacher, it says that, what is it again, without examining the teacher, if the student doesn't examine the teacher, engaging with the teacher is like drinking poison. And the teacher accepting a student without examining the student is like jumping off a cliff. So one should begin by checking for the traits listed here. As for the qualities of the student who should be taught, the luminous Tantra of self-manifesting awareness states: strong faith and great diligence, great intelligence and no attachment, great reverence and secret mantra conduct, non-conceptuality and an undistracted mind, with samaya vows and diligence in practice. The teaching should not be given to anyone who lacks the qualities mentioned here. If such a master and student come together, there will be that much difficulty in accomplishing enlightenment, just as a bird with 2 wings flies easily through the sky. This should be much less difficult. Yeah. If these qualified master and students then meet, then it will go well, just like a bird that possesses both wings. Therefore, students need to serve a qualified guru as well. They should look for any flaws and defects that conflict with the teachings, immediately recognize what is the most dominant, and then apply the appropriate remedy to their mind stream. Yeah, so this is about the student recognizing the flaws and defects within themselves. Yeah, and then apply antidotes. Okay, let's see if there's any questions. Okay, so the jobs were not perfectly done. The changes are recognized when facing some obstacles or set on the path. Yes, we very often recognize the value of our practice through facing obstacles. But again, we never give up. And it's all right. We practice imperfectly and we remedy the situation. It's all good. How to reconcile? Thinking of the teachings given by the teacher as ultimate truth with the 2 truths. Well, we talk about certain truth as at the level of absolute truth. We don't talk about the 2 truths. So, of course, in the absolute truth, and concepts like relative truth, absolute truth are really just what we call dependent arisings. But what we're talking about here is that we're, I think, more on an immediate level. We're just talking about the teacher who is what the teacher teaches is really the truth. So even if they're teaching relative truth, we just consider that this being the last word, so to speak, the ultimate statement with regards to what is there. And we can see it as the teacher being the omniscient one, being the Dharmakaya, manifest in front of us, then we can consider that every little direction, and it might be, something about how to offer a flower on the shrine. We could see that as being the perfect, absolute truth in terms of what our need is. Are all those 3 gurus the same one, or might we have 3, each one with those qualities? They could possibly be different ones. Just reading it, I had the same thought, but very often they are the same one. So could you please tell us more about the webinar on Monday? Yeah, I'm just every Monday I do these webinars, but this one here will be on the the Sutra of the. It's about the 4 strengths. So it's on Monday. If you want info about it, I can send you. Regarding the new group starting on Monday, please let me have no, there's nothing new. This is old. This has been happening since, God, I don't know, 3 or 4 years now, every Monday. So look, it's on the Siddhartha Intent website, but if you want, let me know. If you don't have the links and also the access to the recordings, send me a mail and I can send it to you. Here we have the 4th Buddha, and this is Vajradhara. It says, in the place of the material womb, the source of the passions, the teacher youthful. No, this is not it. Well, that's a shame. This is the 5th one, Vajradhara. Let me just see if I can find it. Okay, well, I thought I had it here. Anyway, the teacher here is Vajradhara, and is then one of the and this is then one of the 12 Stockton teachers. So, teacher Vajradhara. I'll bring I'll bring the data about him next time. Okay, we've reached the end, and thank you for joining here. So, through this virtue may all beings throughout existence awaken together without a single being left behind. In the pure realm of the luminous essence, the ground of the great perfection, may they remain inseparable from the kayas and wisdoms. Through all our births, wherever we may be born, may we be endowed with the 7 good qualities of the higher realms. As soon as we are born, may we meet with the Dharma and have the freedom to practice it properly. At that time, may we please the holy gurus and practice the Dharma throughout day and night. Realizing the Dharma and accomplishing its essential meaning, may we cross the ocean of existence in that life. Thoroughly teaching the holy Dharma in this world, may we never tire of accomplishing the benefit of others. By this vast benefit of others, without partiality or bias, may all attain Buddhahood together. Thank you.